Hello, am I audible? Okay, I will not be switching on my video today because I'm in a very limited internet connectivity area and the call might not work. And okay, so today is the last tutorial for animal physiology for the 12th week of the course, which was the last week of the course. And I am Geetika Agarwal. I'm a PhD scholar at Center for Ecological Sciences, IIC Bengaluru. And let's keep this an interactive session. If you guys have any doubts or any questions in between, kindly just either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and tell me if you have any doubts. Okay, I will be just summarizing the lectures of this week a little bit, and then we'll have a small Q&A session. Okay, so coming to the topics that were covered in the 12th week, we mostly looked at the endocrine system, the digestive system, reproductive and excretory system, and then we looked at the composition of blood and how blood gets formed, or like how do the cells differentiate to form different cells in the blood. Okay, so coming to the modes of communication among cells, how do cells communicate with each other? So can you guys tell me, or do you guys have an idea of what are the different modes of communication that we see happening among cells? So cells in the human body, they communicate with each other, and there are different modes in which this communication happens. So can you guys tell me what are some of the modes that you know of in which cells communicate with one another?
Ma'am, autocrine, paracrine, those things.
Yes, exactly. So
Mm-mm.
autocrine, paracrine, and the last one is, as you know, endocrine. So basically, if the cell is signaling to itself, that's called a self-signaling cell, and that's called autocrine. If the cell is signaling to adjacent cells, the cells nearby it, that's called paracrine, and that's mostly lasts for a very the response to that type of signaling is very quick and it lasts for a very short time. Something similar to paracrine signaling is also neuronal signaling, in which, as we know, one of the sender neurons or the presynaptic neurons, it gives neurotransmitters, and these are picked up by the postsynaptic neurons, and this is how those two neurons talk to each other. And the last one is the endocrine signaling, which is a long distance sort of a signaling in which the signaler cells, they give out the molecules into the bloodstream, and these molecules or hormones, they travel throughout the bloodstream, and when they reach the receptor cells, that is when the receptors pick them up and they respond to these signals. So this is mostly leads to a slower response because of course these molecules have to travel throughout the blood to reach the responding cells. So it is a slow response system, but the response lasts longer. So these are different modes in which cells communicate with each other in the human body. So coming to the endocrine system. So can you guys tell me what are the different uh, organs in the endocrine system? So can you label this diagram for me? What are the different organs that we see in the endocrine system? Okay, so I'll point my cursor, and you guys can tell me what that is. Okay. So what do we have up here in the brain area? This, and this.
Thymus,
Hypothalamus and
sorry, hypothalamus,
hmm.
medulla,
No. There are three of the endocrine glands in our head. One is hypothalamus. Anybody else would like to take a guess? What are the two other endocrine glands that we find? Nobody? Okay, what is the one that's located in the neck? You would know this, like everybody would have studied this in the high school. What is this endocrine gland that we find in the neck? Anybody would like to take a guess or would just like to answer? Thyroid gland, exactly. So, thyroid gland is located in the throat. Then we have other glands as well. So, okay, since it's taking longer than expected, so let me just tell you what are the different endocrine glands we find. We basically have the hypothalamus, as you said, and apart from that, we have the pituitary and the pineal gland, which are located in our head. Then we have the thyroid and parathyroid glands in the neck. We have the thymus somewhere in the chest. And then we have pancreas, which is an exocrine and endocrine gland, both of these. Then we have the adrenal glands, which are present as caps on our kidneys. And then we have ovaries and placenta in the females, and we have the testicle in the males. So these are some of the endocrine glands that we're going to be looking at in during this tutorial session. So moving on to steroid and non-steroid hormones. So hormones can mostly be classified as either steroids or non-steroids based on what molecules they're made up of. So can you tell me what is the most basic difference between steroid and non-steroid hormones? Anyone? What is the most basic difference between steroid and non-steroid hormones? Or how are they different in terms of their in terms of how they operate? Anybody would like to answer or take a guess? Okay, so the basic difference between steroid and non-steroid hormones is that steroid hormones are hydrophobic and they can cross the cell's lipid membrane, uh, the bilipid membrane or the cell membrane. They can cross that and they mostly enter the cell and then they bind to the receptor molecules. So that is peptides. Uh, Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Ma'am, your voice is not audible, ma'am.
Hello. Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Uh, Moving yeah. So I was saying that the steroid hormones are hydrophobic because they are made up of such molecules. Steroids, basically like cholesterol, they're made up of such molecules that they are hydrophobic. They can pass through the lipid membrane, and so they bind to the receptor molecules after entering the cell. On the other hand, non-steroid hormones, which are made up of peptides or protein molecules like amino acids, they are hydrophilic, so they cannot pass through the lipid membrane. So they bind to the receptors which are present on the. Oh, my screen is not visible. One second. Should be visible. Yeah, is it visible now? I reshared it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. The peptide hormones, they bind to the receptors which are present on the surface of the cell, which are present within the cell membrane. And some examples of steroid hormones include glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and androgens. These are mostly produced by the adrenal gland. And other who are peptide hormones, they include insulin, which is produced by the pancreas, hypothalamus signaling hormones, and the adrenaline hormone. So this is some of the basic differences between steroid and peptide hormones, and you should keep them in mind. They might be important for the exam. Okay, moving on to, we have these different glands. So can you guys name some of the hormones that are produced by these different glands? So let's start with the hypothalamus. Can you guys name some of the hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus? You would have come across this during your high school or PUC. What are some of the hormones produced by the hypothalamus? And kindly make sure not to confuse hypothalamus with the hippocampus. We've been talking about the hippocampus a lot during the past lectures, which is which was important for memory and all of these things, which was related to epilepsy and all that. So hypothalamus is different from the hippocampus. Dopamine, yes, that is correct. So dopamine is one of the hormones produced by the hypothalamus. What other hormones are produced by the hypothalamus? Anyone else would like to guess?
GABA.
GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter. That is not a hormone. GABA is not a hormone, it's a neurotransmitter.
Okay.
Oxytocin, vasopressin. Oxytocin is, I don't think that's produced by the hypothalamus, but okay. It is. Correct. Okay. So, some of the hormones that are released by the hypothalamus include, like as you said, dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin. Apart from that, there are these hormones that uh, lead to the release of hormones by the pituitary gland. So that is why they are called releasing hormones. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, which has an effect in which causes the release of thyrotropin. Growth hormone releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone. So these are some of the hormones that are released by the hypothalamus. Can you tell me the hormone? There is only one hormone that is released by the pineal gland. So can you guys tell me what is the hormone that is released by the pineal gland? I'll give you one hint that the pineal gland is important for our circadian rhythm, for the maintenance of the circadian rhythm. So can you guys guess what is the hormone that is released by the pineal gland? Anyone? What is the hormone that is produced by the pineal gland? Melatonin, exactly. So you're correct. So since the pineal gland is involved in the maintaining the circadian rhythm of the human body, it releases the hormone which is called melatonin. Melatonin, as you might already know, is the it's basically responsible for making us fall to sleep. So it is released at mostly our bedtime, whatever we mostly the time that when we go to sleep, and it goes to a peak and then it comes down mostly at night. And when it's at the peak, that is the time when we should try and fall asleep before that, so that we complete all our important sleep cycles, the REM cycle, the non-REM cycle, all of these things. Okay, moving on. So the thyroid gland produces these two hormones, triiodine thyronine and thyroxine. These are responsible for metabolism. Pituitary glands leads to has two different lobes, anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary, and between them there is something called the intermediate pituitary. The posterior pituitary leads to the release of oxytocin, vasopressin. They also store oxytocin and releases ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone, which plays a role in the excretory system. And the anterior pituitary, this is the one that is stimulated by these hormones: growth hormone releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone. So it releases the growth hormone, releases the thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating, luteinizing, and prolactin. So these are some of the hormones released by the different endocrine glands present in the upper part of our body. So moving on to how the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland. So as I said, pituitary has these two lobes, the posterior lobe and the anterior lobe. An important thing to keep in mind is that the hypothalamus directly signals the posterior lobe with no involvement of blood. The signal just travels via the neurons. So these hormones, they're not passed on via blood. But when it signals the anterior lobe, that is when those hormones, they are released into the bloodstream and they reach the anterior lobe of the pituitary via the blood. So this is an important point to keep in mind while talking about the hypothalamus pituitary axis. Okay. So moving on to the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, how the hypothalamus releases hormones that impact the pituitary, and in turn pituitary impacts the thyroid gland. So as we discussed, thyroid gland is the one that's present in our neck region. It has these different follicles. These are the follicular cells, and these are the parafollicular cells, which are the cells that are present near these follicles. The follicles, they lead to the release of thyronine and thyroxine, as we discussed before. And these C cells, they lead to the release of calcitonin, which is released in lesser amounts as compared to thyroxine. And this is the feedback loop of the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. Basically, the hypothalamus releases the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which goes to the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary releases the thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid to release the T3, T4. And these have an impact on the effector cells, which in turn lead to a negative feedback to the stimulus itself. And then it gives a negative feedback, and this does not release these hormones anymore. And these T3, T4 also, when they're released, T3 is triiodothyronine and T4 is thyroxine, then they also lead to a negative impact or a negative feedback loop with the anterior pituitary and with the hypothalamus respectively. So this is how signal gets transmitted between these three endocrine organs. Moving on to the adrenal hormones, which are released by the adrenal glands of our body. So, the adrenal gland can be divided into two parts. One is the cortex, which is this outer layer, and one is the medulla, which is the inner layer. And the cortex can further be divided into three zones. One is zona reticularis, which leads to the release of sex hormone precursors. Then there is this zona fasciculata in the middle, which leads to the release of cortisol. And then there is zona glomerulosa on the top or on the outermost layer, which leads to the release of aldosterone. Okay. So these are the different areas of the adrenal gland which lead to release of different hormones. So can you guys tell me what are the hormones that are released by the adrenal medulla? Since we've already looked at what are the hormones released by the adrenal cortex. So what is the adrenal medulla responsible for? It is a very famous response by the human body. So can you tell me what is the hormones released by the adrenal medulla? Anybody? Exactly. It's adrenaline and noradrenaline. Very good. So these are the two hormones released by the adrenal medulla, which are responsible for the flight or fight response given by us. So adrenaline, it leads to the excitement or the nervousness, anxiety in us, and the noradrenaline helps us stay alert and focused, so as we can take an action, whether it's flight or fight in the situation. And the cortex, as we've discussed, it releases these different hormones. So the aldosterone, or the first one, it regulates the extracellular fluid volume. So as we know, there are cells and these are surrounded by extracellular fluid. So aldosterone, it regulates the volume of that extracellular fluid and leads to a homeostasis of the potassium levels in and out of the cell. And it is also involved in this renin angiotensin aldosterone system, basically in how much sodium is getting absorbed and how much potassium is getting excreted in our kidneys. And this leads to increase or decrease in the levels of sodium, potassium, and blood pressure. Cortisol leads to an it is integral to our stress response, and it has a metabolic impact as well, and anti-inflammatory immunosuppressive impacts, and it is regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary and adrenal axis, which is also called the HPA axis. And the last one is the sex hormone precursors. The functions of these are not very well known as of yet. Moving on to the pancreas. Pancreas, as I said, has both functions, exocrine functions and endocrine functions. And there are these cells called the islets of Langerhans. Can you tell me what are the different cell types found in the pancreas that release different types of hormones? So there are these different cell types. What are these different cell types and what are the different hormones released by them? Anybody? We've already discussed this in previous tutorials. It has been discussed in the lectures as well. What are the different cell types in the pancreas and what are the hormones that they release? Nobody? Okay, so basically, pancreas has these different cell types. One of them is called alpha cells, which makes up 15 to 20% of the total islets of Langerhans cells. Then there are beta cells, and then there are gamma cells, or the TP cells. And there are also something called the delta cells. So now, looking at what functions do these cells play? Alpha cells are basically responsible for the production of glucagon. Hello, am I not audible? Hello. Hello. Am I audible now? Okay, great. Yes, so I was saying, as I was we have these different types of cells: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Alpha cells, they lead to the production of glucagon, and glucagon, as we know, is something that it leads to the breaking down of glycogen and leads to the release of glucose into the bloodstream. So when the blood glucose levels fall down, that is when the pancreas gets stimulated and it releases glucagon, and glucagon leads to the release of glucose in the bloodstream. Beta cells do the opposite. They release insulin, and when there is an increase in the blood sugar, that is when insulin is secreted, and that leads to the storage of insulin away. It leads the cells to take up the glucose from the blood and store it as glycogen. So it leads to a decrease in the blood glucose level. Gamma cells are the PP cells, which form just 3 to 5% of the total cells. They release the pancreatic polypeptide, that is why they are called PP cells. And in this, what happens is they are simulated by the meals that are very high in protein. So if we eat very high protein meals, for example, if we eat cottage cheese or if we eat chana or chicken, things like that, which are high in protein, that leads to a release in pancreatic polypeptide. And it is also released when there is high physical activity or fasting, all of these things. And it inhibits the pancreatic exocrine and endocrine activity. So it inhibits both these activities of the pancreas. It inhibits it from releasing exocrine enzymes as well as endocrine activity, for example insulin. Okay, last one is delta cells. They only form 3 to 10% of the total islet cells, and they produce somatostatin. That is the hormone they produce, which is called somatostatin. Somatostatin has a paracrine function, which means it affects the cells nearby it. It does not have an endocrine function, and it suppresses the release of both insulin and glucagon. Okay, so this was all about the pancreas. So I have discussed all the four different cell types and what are the hormones that they release. Moving on to the reproductive organs of humans and how they act as endocrine cells. So, can you guys tell me what are the different hormones that are released by the ovaries and the testes in the humans? So, our gonads or our reproductive organs, which is the ovary in females and testes in males, they also act as endocrine glands. So, can you guys tell me what are the hormones that are released by these two glands?
Estrogen.
Any yeah, uh, estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and what about the testes? Testosterone. So you're correct. So basically, ovaries release these two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Both of them they help in thickening the endometrium, which is the uterine lining, preparing the uterus to accept the incoming embryo. And both of them they inhibit the release of follicle stimulating hormone and LH as well. And they stimulate, but estrogen has an additional function. It stimulates the release of both of these hormones just pre-ovulation. Okay. And coming to the testes, in testes, the major hormone being released is the testosterone, which basically is released by the Leydig cells. So the testes have these different cell types, but the Leydig cells are responsible for releasing the testosterone. And what it does is it maintains and controls the various growth functions and growth of the different secondary sexual characteristics of the males, and it controls the libido and spermatogenesis as well. Another thing is inhibin and estradiol. These both are also released by the Sertoli cells. What inhibin does is that it releases to a pituitary feedback, which inhibits the release of follicle stimulating hormone. Like in females, estrogen and progesterone, both of them inhibit FSH. In males, inhibin does that. And estradiol is produced by testosterone metabolism, and it prevents the apoptosis of the male germ cells. Okay, so that is the function of estradiol. So, but the main hormone released by the testes is testosterone. Moving on to the digestive system. So, we discussed about the digestive system during this week. There are these different structures present in the digestive system: buccal cavity, esophagus, then food moves on to stomach, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, small intestine, large intestine. So, digestive system, I guess, is pretty basic. So, can you guys tell me what happens in the buccal cavity and what kind of enzymes are released in the buccal cavity and how they lead to the breakdown of certain molecules? can you tell me what is the function of the buccal cavity in digestion? Buccal cavity is also the oral cavity or our mouth. So how does digestion take place here?
By chewing the food.
Yes, the first thing that happens is that we chew the food and we break it down into, uh, we form a bolus that moves down into the digestive tract. But there are these certain enzymes that are released in the buccal cavity, uh, which lead to breaking down of complex sugars. So, can you tell me what are these enzymes that are released in our buccal cavity that lead to breaking down of complex sugars into simpler ones?
Saliva. Yes.
So in the saliva, we have these things called the amylase and lipase. These are two enzymes, exactly. Salivary amylase, and we have lipase as well. They both lead to the breaking down of complex sugar into simpler sugar that are then taken up, or into breaking down into glucose that are taken up by the surrounding, like the cheeks and these the cheeks, actually the inner cheeks, that is where some of these glucose is taken up as well, and the rest of it is passes down as the bolus to the stomach. So esophagus, you all might know, is important for the peristalsis of food and for the movement of food down. And then we come to the stomach. So can you tell me what are the important enzymes released in the stomach and what are their functions? Anyone, what are the important chemicals and enzymes being released in the stomach? Pepsin, exactly. So in the stomach, cells release. Yes. So pepsin is basically activated by the presence of HCl by the acidic environment in the stomach. Pepsinogen is what is it? It is released as, and pepsinogen gets converted to pepsin in the presence of acidic environment. And HCl is released by the chief cells of the stomach. Then we come to pancreas. We already discussed pancreas. Then there is liver and gallbladder. As you might know, liver is important in detoxification of different things. For example, if somebody ingests alcohol, that is also processed by the liver. And it also takes care if there are any toxins in the food, it processes those. Even medications are. Hello. Sorry, my internet is a little patchy. That's why uh, my audio might not be that clear. Am I audible now? Is it better or worse than before? It's okay. Okay. So, um liver, as we know, it actually secretes bile, and bile is responsible for emulsifying fats and hence in the digestion of these fats. And gallbladder is the organ which stores this bile, and we need this additional bile so as to for it to be quickly released into the duodenum where it emulsifies these different fats. Then we come to small intestine. Small intestine plays an important role in the picking up of nutrients from the food that we've just ingested, and large intestine is the last place where the food travels through, and that is where a lot of water in the food is reabsorbed, and that is where it finally gets converted into feces. So that is all about the digestive system. If you guys have any doubts, you can ask me. Otherwise, let's move on to the excretory system. So basically, these are this is the rough diagram of the excretory system. You all might already be aware of how blood travels through the kidneys and it gets purified and it recirculates throughout the body. And a lot of these different metabolites or secondary metabolites like urea, uric acid, these things get removed by the kidney. Excess salts get removed by the kidney or filtered, and then they are what do you call it, excreted as urine from our body. And kidney is made up of these different things. For example, in the diagram you can see there are these renal pyramids, renal medulla. These are these and nephron is the structural unit of the kidney, or the smallest unit of the kidney, where the filtering actually happens. So if you guys have any doubts about the excretory system, you can ask me, because I don't think I should go in much detail in explaining the kidneys, because this is like high school level things. So this is what the nephron looks like when zoomed in. Basically, blood enters this, and here a lot of these connectivities you can see. This is where the exchange of salts and water happens, and here is the glomerulus, and this is a zoomed in diagram of the glomerulus, which is also called the renal corpuscle. And in the glomerulus, this is the Bowman's capsule, and this is the Bowman's space. And this is where a lot of the filtrate goes away. So all these things that have to be thrown, they go away, and the blood gets filtered and it gets returned. So this is how filtering of blood is happening in the kidneys. And here in this area, in this loop, which is also called the nephron loop or the loop of Henle, this is where we have the ascending and the descending limbs, and this is where salt and water are being exchanged. A lot of water gets picked up here by the blood. So because we do not want to be dehydrated as well, so we do not want to lose a lot of water as urine. Okay, moving on to the reproductive systems. So, the male reproductive system, as you might already know, has these organs, which is the testes, where we have these different types of cells, and we have this epididymis. In these cells, sperms are produced, and they travel through the epididymis out through the urethra, and then the males have this penis. This is how the testis is connected to these places, and they also have the release the sperm uh, into this tube here, the urethra itself. And this is how the sperm looks like. It has a head, it has a midpiece. Midpiece has a lot of mitochondria, which actually powers the sperm, because the sperm has to travel a long distance from the cervix all the way up to the fallopian tubes where it fertilizes the egg. And this is the tail, which helps it to swim. Okay, so this is all about the male reproductive system. Moving on to the female reproductive system in a small gist. This is how the female reproductive system looks like. These are the ovaries, one on the right, one on the left. We have these fallopian tubes connecting these ovaries to the uterus, and we have this area which is called the cervix, and then the vagina, which is uh, the accepting area. So this is all about the female reproductive system, and this is how we have these follicles that mature and become into an egg. Once one egg is released by alternate ovaries each month. So if this month is the right ovary is producing the egg, then the next month the left ovary would be the one that is producing the egg. And then we come to the menstrual cycle. You all might be aware of the menstrual cycle. We have these it's like a 28-day cycle, in which here, as you can see, this is the menstruation phase. If the egg does not get fertilized, then eventually the thick endometrial lining gets disintegrated, and it is thrown out of the body as menstrual blood. And then the follicle again starts maturing, and when it is mature, that is the follicular phase. And that is when the lining starts to thicken again, because eventually the estrogen and level of estrogen goes up, which maintains this lining, and FSH and LH are also being released. And by these luteinizing and follicular stimulating hormones, eventually ovulation happens. This is the phase when the females are receptive, or when the egg can get fertilized within a period of 1 to 4 days. But if the egg does not get fertilized, then eventually again we'll come back to the menstruation phase. So total overall, this is a 28-day cycle. And here we have progesterone release. So if the egg gets fertilized, then the progesterone is the one that maintains the thickness of the endometrial layer. So during the luteal phase, we still have the endometrial layer, but eventually, if the egg does not get fertilized at all, then it goes on to menstruation. Okay, and it is the fallopian tubes, but that is the location where the egg gets fertilized, and this fertilized egg then comes down to the uterus, and it gets embedded into the uterine lining or the endometrial lining. Moving on to the fertilization of the egg with the sperm. So this is just a diagram, and I'm just gonna give a small gist of it. Basically, the first sperm that touches the, so basically here you can see that the sperm makes a contact with the egg, and then there's, this is the acrosome which is present at the tip of the sperm. This acrosome, it reacts with this zona pellucida, which is the outermost layer of the egg, and it sort of digests this layer, and that is how uh, the sperm moves forward. And the acrosome then also interacts with the previtelline space. So that is how it moves forward towards the central zone of the egg. Eventually, the plasma membrane of the sperm and the egg, they fuse together, and the sperm nucleus goes ahead and moves, fuses with the egg nucleus, forming the, coming back to 2n, because both the egg and the sperm are haploids. So these nucleus then fuse and they form a 2n embryo. So, the last topic for today is blood, where we discuss what blood is made up of. You all might be aware blood has these cells like the red blood cells and the white blood cells and platelets, and the rest of it is plasma, which forms the major part, where water is the solvent, and it contains ions, proteins, nutrients, and a lot of these gases, oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide, which we are exchanging, and the metabolites or the wastes, which have to be filtered in the kidney. So we have these different types of white blood cells. These are granulocytes. These are the non-granulocytes, platelets responsible for clotting, and the red blood cells, which are responsible for exchange of gases throughout the body. And white blood cells are responsible for the immune response, leading to how these blood cells get formed. So kidney acts, it releases this hormone which is called the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin acts on the blood stem cells present in the bone marrow, and they lead to its differentiation. And the blood stem cell differentiates into the myeloid stem cell and the lymphoid stem cell. Myeloid stem cell, it leads to the formation of red blood cells and platelets and myeloblasts. Myeloblasts leads to granulocytes, which are eosinophils, neutrophils, and basophils. These are three types of granulocytes present in our blood: eosinophils, neutrophils, and basophils. Lymphoid stem cells forms lymphoblast, which lead to B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and natural killer cells. And all of these six cell types are what form the white blood cells or the immune system of our body. Okay. Now we are gonna move on to the Q&A session. These were all the slides that I had for today, and I summarized the 5 lectures from this week. So moving on to the Q&A session. So erythropoietin is a dash that is produced in dash. So is it red blood cells produced in the heart, or hormones produced in the kidney, or red blood cells in the lungs, or hormones produced in the brain? We just discussed it in the last slide. It's basically the hormone which is produced in the kidneys. So you guys are correct. Moving on to tamoxifen, which is a dopant which has been banned in sports. What is it, and what is it commonly used for? So it's used for the treatment of one of these things. So is it used for the treatment of ALS or breast cancer? And what is it? Is it a pregnancy inducer or an estrogen modulator? Correct. So the correct answer is D part. Basically, it's an estrogen modulator, which you can guess from it being a dopant, and it is used in the treatment of breast cancer. Dash is used to increase milk production in cattle. So which of these hormones is responsible for milk production? And so, which of these might be used to increase the milk production in cattle? You are correct. The correct answer is oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone which is released by the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and it leads to a release, in an increased release of milk. And the stimulus for this is actually the baby suckling onto the breast of a mother. Renin and angiotensin are produced by which of these organs or glands? So yes, the correct answer is the kidneys. Kidney is responsible for the production of renin and angiotensin. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH, is released from what? And then TSH is released from what? And then T4 from what? Of work together, and they maintain the homeostasis. So what's the answer? What is TRH released from? What is TSH released from? And what is T4 released from? So you guys are correct. So TRH is released from hypothalamus, TSH is released from pituitary, and the T4 is released from the thyroid gland. Dash is a chain of 2 to 50 amino acids. So if we have a chain of 2 to 50 amino acids, what is it called? Is it an aggregate? Is it agar? Is it peptide? Or is it a proteome? What is a chain of 2 to 50 amino acids called? Yes, so you guys are correct. It's basically a peptide. So a small chain of amino acids is called a peptide. Iodine deficiency leads to dash, and what does it primarily affect? Correct again. So basically, iodine deficiency leads to goiter, and goiter is a disease or which affects the thyroid gland. Parietal cells secrete what, and the gastric chief cells secrete what, which is converted into dash. So you're correct. It's the parietal cells that actually secrete the HCl, and the chief cells secrete pepsinogen, which gets converted into pepsin. What emulsifies fat for digestion, and what controls blood sugar? So, which of these emulsifies fat, and which of these controls the blood sugar levels? So, you guys are correct. Bile, as I said, it emulsifies fat, and insulin is the one that controls blood sugar. So, is it is recommended to avoid aspirin in case of injury causing cuts. Why is it recommended that we should avoid aspirin if we have cuts or if we have an injury? Why should you avoid aspirin in case of cuts? Other people, would you like to take a guess on this question? Why is it recommended to avoid aspirin if we have cuts? So, you guys are correct. Basically, aspirin acts as an anticoagulant. It leads to thinning of the blood and will lead to a loss of blood at the site of injury. Which of these glands is known as the master gland of the endocrine system? Is it thyroid, adrenal, pituitary, or pineal? Yes, so you all are correct. It's the pituitary gland, which is also called the master gland of the endocrine system. Which component of blood is responsible for clotting and stopping bleeding? So, which of these is responsible for clotting and stopping bleeding? Is my screen not visible? Okay. Hello. So the question is, which component of blood is responsible for clotting and for stopping bleeding or leading to a blood clot? Yes, the correct answer is platelets. So basically, as you all might have known, clotting is, and we studied it in positive feedback loop. Basically, clotting happens because of platelets. Which enzyme breaks down starches into simpler sugars in the mouth? Which of these is responsible for the breaking down of starch into simpler sugars in the mouth? Yes, the correct answer is amylase. Which structure in the female reproductive system is the site of fertilization? Where does fertilization happen in the female reproductive system? Correct. So the correct answer is the fallopian tube. That is where the fertilization happen, and then the fertilized egg moves down to the uterus. With what hormone is responsible for regulating metabolism in the body? Which of these hormones is responsible for regulating metabolism in the body? Other people would like to answer. So Surajit is correct. It's basically the thyroxine because growth hormone is responsible for growth, melatonin for sleep, and testosterone is responsible for secondary sexual characteristics in males. So thyroxine is the one that plays an important role in metabolism of the body. Bile, which helps in digestion of fats, is produced by which of these organs? Correct. So basically, bile, as we said, is produced by liver and is stored in the gallbladder. What is the main function of red blood cells in the blood? So what do RBCs do? So you guys are correct. RBCs basically transport oxygen. So I would like to ask an additional question on this slide. So what is an important feature of the RBCs that make them suitable for transporting oxygen? So there is this one characteristic feature of RBCs which makes them suitable for transporting gases or oxygen and carbon dioxide. Can you tell me what is that structure? Okay. So can you please elaborate? So I'm not asking about presence of hemoglobin. That we all know that hemoglobin is important for the oxygen transfer. There is one another thing about the red blood cells which makes them suitable for the transport of gases or oxygen, to be more precise. Anyone? So an important feature of the RBCs is that they are enucleated cells. They do not have a nucleus. So this has two functions. Basically, one, it gives them more. So it actually makes them. They will not metabolize oxygen themselves. They will not be able to use the oxygen themselves because they don't have a nucleus. So they'll not be able to use the oxygen, and also it frees up space in the cell. So that is why. being enucleated is very important for the RBCs to carry oxygen. Okay, so moving on to the functional unit of kidney where filtration and absorption occurs is called what? Correct. So basically, nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. Which part of the digestive system is the primary site of nutrient absorption? Which of these parts of the digestive system is the location where most nutrients gets absorbed from the ingested food? So everybody has different answers, but the correct answer is by Surajit. It's basically the small intestine where most of the nutrients get absorbed. Moving on to what is the primary male reproductive organ that produces sperm? Straightforward question. Correct. So the correct answer is testes. Testes is the primary male organ that leads to the production of sperm. Which organ in the excretory system is responsible for filtering blood and producing urine? Again, another straightforward question. It's the kidney. We all know that. Kidney is responsible for the filtering of blood and for the production of urine. What is the liquid portion of blood called that contains water, protein, and other substances? Plasma is the correct answer. Plasma is the liquid portion of the blood which contains water and soluble proteins. Which hormone plays a key role in maintaining pregnancy? Which of these hormones has a very important role in maintaining pregnancy? So you're correct. It's progesterone. As I said, it helps in maintaining the thickness of the endometrial lining. So it is important for maintaining pregnancy. So this was all for today. We've covered the last week. We've looked at what was mostly discussed, and we've covered the Q&A session as well. So if anybody has any doubts, you can ask me. Otherwise, you're free to leave the meeting. We're done for the day. Thank you for joining.